The first presenter is Rachel Mamiya Hernandez from the University of Hawaii, and she is going to give you a description of a project that she developed in our professional development series so that you can see how it might be for you to undergo this professional development experience and develop a project.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming and attending this presentation. And aloha from Honolulu. I'm Rachel Mamiya Hernandez. I'm an instructor of Portuguese and Spanish here at the University of Hawaii, and I'm so glad you're here to listen to my presentation. And stop video. And let's see, share screen. Okay, so one thing I wanted to let you know is that as I'm sharing my screen, I'm unable to see the chat, but the questions and comments of yours will be fed to me at the end. So if I don't react immediately to any of your questions or feedback, just know that I will see it and I will address it at the end. So welcome to my presentation, Empowering Learners Through Project-Based Learning. And you can access this presentation. You can see the URL below. Just again, my name is Rachel Mamiya Hernandez, and I teach Portuguese and Spanish languages here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So a little bit of a presentation overview. We'll talk about gold standard PBL and best practices. We'll also look at my project and the implementation process, and then talk a little bit if you want to know about more and other resources that you can look at. And just to let you know a little bit about the history of this project, I did the online PBL course. Even though I live here in Hawaii, my teaching schedule, as many of you are busy teachers, didn't allow me to go to the face-to-face sessions, so I did the online course and then participated in the Intensive Summer Institute in 2015. And I really want to encourage you all, if you're thinking about doing it, or if you're into PBLL, it doesn't matter if you're a beginner or if you've had a lot of experience. It's definitely a worthwhile process, and I found it really invigorating, and I learned a tremendous amount about PBLL. It's great as educators to be able to connect with other teachers and to really take some time out and get feedback. I think we see the value of feedback as teachers, but we often don't get many opportunities to receive feedback ourselves. So I think it was an extremely valuable experience, and it took me on sort of a winding road with my project where I had one idea and it completely changed through my experiences in the Intensive Summer Institute. So if you're thinking about applying or thinking about PBLL, I really want to encourage you to consider the online course and possibly the Intensive Summer Institute. So this is a quote from Thornburg, and he says that Renaissance thinkers were creative people, not just those who memorized a large number of disconnected facts. They also thought in terms of projects and not in terms of isolated tasks. And this is something I really want us to keep in mind as we think about projects and project-based learning and thinking about what we really want for our learners. So, thinking about why PBLL and what do we really want learners to be able to do with the language? We want them to actively engage in content, and PBL allows us to do that, to be responsible for their own learning, to gain 21st century skills, to think critically, to make a difference and have impact in what they do, to build confidence, to manage time and work efficiently, to build college, career, and life skills, and to communicate effectively in the target language. So PBLL is really a vehicle that allows us to work on all those skills while in the process of making a project or doing a project. So this is from the Buck Institute of Education, and they have a wealth of resources on PBL, not specific to PBLL, but project-based learning. They have tons of wonderful information and different tools you can use. Everything is free. You just have to kind of sign up for their site, but all their resources are free. So this is the idea of gold standard PBLL. So we can see here the essential project design elements, and it's supposed to be like a camera lens with the key knowledge, understanding, and success skills. So sort of the focus we want for our students in the middle, and we can see the other pieces. And we start off with the challenging problem or question. So that's really what is going to drive your project. And that's really something that I think it's important to focus on. Um, and it's sort of what will push your project through and keep your students interested. Along with that, we have sustained inquiry. So looking at gold standard project-based learning, we don't want just a project of 2 or 3 days. We want this to be something that students work on throughout the semester. So it actually becomes part of the curriculum and part of what you're doing. An important piece, especially for us language teachers, is authenticity. Since we know that language is a real world thing and something that students use all the time outside of the classroom, keeping the idea of authenticity and having the project be authentic and an opportunity for you to use the language in an authentic way is extremely important. Another extremely important piece is student voice and choice. So I'm going to go back to this idea a lot, but giving your students the opportunity to have a voice and to have a say in the project and to feel like they're taking ownership of what they're doing is extremely important. Another important piece, of course, is the idea of reflection. So building into your project design time and places for students to reflect not only on what they're learning for the project, but pieces of the language as well. So reflection is also an extremely vital part of essential design elements when you're thinking of your project. Also, of course, critique and revision. So especially in terms of language, not just critiquing the language, but critiquing um, what they're doing and having them have opportunities built in to revise what they've done. And of course, a very important and last but definitely not least piece of gold standard project-based learning is the idea of a public product. So you want them to have a product for an authentic audience. And this is an extremely important in terms of motivation for the students and also just in making the project a more meaningful experience for them. So this you can find on the BIE.org. Another idea, and this is from an article by Warner and Baines, is on the idea of empowering learners through project-based learning. So they really stress purpose, structure, design, and use. So in terms of purpose, we're thinking that students are empowered when they understand the meaning and significance of the content. In terms of structure, we want PBLL to be empowering to use real world skills and tasks and to address real world problems. So you really want to think about that when you are conceiving your project. The other thing is, in terms of design, especially for language learners, you want to take in the idea of scaffolding. So scaffold their learning and their revision process, and also include student voice and choice. So let them have a say in what's going on in the direction of their project, maybe in different pieces. It's very important and very empowering for them as learners. And in terms of use, of course, the idea of scaffolding and revision, and of course, having a public audience at the end. Now, there are many tools for planning, like I said, on Buck Institute of Education website. Also, the National Foreign Language Resource Center has many tools for organizing and planning your project. This was one which we used during our Summer Institute, which I felt very helpful because it takes just the basic things you really need to think about when you're conceiving your project. So the problem or question, your challenge, what you want your driving question to be, thinking about the purpose, thinking about the product that you want your students to make at the end of the project, and thinking about who is your audience. So these are really the most basic things you need to think about when you're conceiving and planning your project. And of course, the very important question to always ask yourself, why do kids care, or why do people care, or why do the students care about this? So always kind of keeping in mind that idea and that question to see that what you're doing is meaningful. So now we're going to take a little look at implementing PBLL, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my process and my project. So the project I did was called Projeto Vamos Ler, which means Project Let's Read in Portuguese, and it was carried out with a college-level intermediate Portuguese class. So this is sort of our project description, the idea behind our driving question. So according to UNESCO's 2012 to 2015 Roundtable on Literacy Action Plan for Brazil, teaching children to read and write is still a major challenge. And we see children in the north and northeast of the country having the highest indices of illiteracy. And actually, illiteracy and functional illiteracy are still a pretty large problem in certain parts of the country. So this project seeks to raise awareness around the issue and address it via a literacy campaign and the creation and distribution of books for young readers in poor communities in the state of Bahia in northeastern Brazil. So another idea behind the project is not just traditional literacy, but also the idea of digital literacy and building digital literacy on both sides. So just some essential competencies of digital and media literacy are access, and I'll let you read through these. I won't read through them all. So analyzing and evaluating, understanding messages and critical thinking. We also have the idea of creating, so composing and generating content with creativity and confidence. Reflection, so applying social responsibility and ethical principles. And act, so working collaboratively um, or with a local, regional, or international community. So these were also ideas that I had behind the project, was not just to work on literacy in Brazil, but also to work on the ideas of digital literacy with both my students and with the students in Brazil. Another important piece to keep in mind is language teachers. For me, are standards, and I use the World Readiness Standards from ACTFL, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not be as familiar with. Maybe the countries you're in or organizations you're a part of also have standards. So in ACTFL, there are communities, communication, cultures, connections, and comparisons. You can take a more in-depth look at them later. I'll have this presentation available, and it has links that you can click to, but it's a little clunky if I click to the links while I'm sharing my screen, so I'll let you do that on your own. But one thing you'll see when thinking about different standards and goals for your projects is the gold standard PBLL, the ACTFL World Readiness Guidelines, and even, standards, and even some ideas of digital literacy. We can see that there are certain places, and there are in fact many places where they'll overlap. So, you can kind of check off multiple boxes when you plan out your project in the right way. We're going to take a look at the project sequence right now. So we started with an entry event, and our entry event were interviews with Teletandem partners. So my students are involved in a totally different project where not a project-based learning project, but a telecollaboration project where they Skype with university students in Brazil. So their entry event was uh, interviewing these partners about children's books in Brazil. Our driving question, and I can't stress enough times how important the driving question is how can we engage and encourage young readers in low-income communities in Brazil? In looking at interculturality, we had the idea of critical examination of children's books, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And also, we included getting to know the community. Another Part of my project sequence, putting learning into action, was through the writing, feedback, and revising. And I also created a video campaign. And of course, our final product were the published children's books delivered to the community in Brazil. Like I mentioned, my students did interviews with their Skype partners who are university students in Brazil, and they basically asked them what their favorite children's books were to kind of get an idea of what stories were popular, what children's books are like in Brazil. And a lot of them were surprised that the books tended to be books that were not written by Brazilians, but kind of fairy tales or translated books. So that they found interesting. Another thing we did in class was talk about what makes a good children's book. So I had bought um, a fair number, I think about 15 or 20 children's books from Brazil, and we brought them into class and we looked through them. I had created a rubric for my students to evaluate them. So looking at the cover, looking at the illustrations, the story, the characters, and giving their own opinions. So we evaluated them. And from that evaluation, we came up with collaborative guidelines. And these collaborative guidelines looked at what makes a good children's book. And I know it looks a little bit messy, but like I said, it's a little clunky if I go in and out of the presentation on my browser, but there's a link to this. So it's basically looking at the plot, the characters, the illustrations, and other elements. And it's a collaborative Google Doc that my students all sort of, after we did the evaluation of children's books, wrote in what they thought made a good children's books from looking at the children's books that they looked at, from their conversations with their Teletandem partners in Brazil. So this sort of became a good piece to add in student voice and choice. So looking at what makes a good book. And from this, you know, this is kind of the jumping off point of where they think about um, their own stories and how to make their own book, children's books, a good book. And also what I used at the end to evaluate their final products. Another thing we did was a critical examination of children's books with Professor Savio, Savio Siqueira from the Federal University in the state of Bahia, so the same state and city where our community was that we were going to work with. And he is an expert in sort of critical pedagogy and has also worked a lot with textbooks in Brazil. So he came in to sort of give us an idea of um, a critical look at books and sort of the underrepresentation of certain populations, especially Afro-Brazilian populations and indigenous populations in Brazilian popular literature. And we also watched a video by a sort of a YouTube sensation in Brazil, Menino Gustavo, who is a young Afro-Brazilian boy and talks about sort of the lack of representation of Afro-Brazilians in children's literature and how he enjoyed reading African folk tales and enjoyed reading books with characters with Afro Brazilian characters in them. Then we spent time getting to know our community, which was in the Canjal neighborhood in the city of Salvador in Brazil. And actually, we also got to know them. Unfortunately, we couldn't, because of the time difference and infrastructure, ever have any um, simultaneous synchronous sessions with them, and we couldn't talk to them directly. So most of the communication was between their teacher and myself. But we did get to know them through pictures she would send, through things she would tell us, and she also sent us this video about their community, which I'll just play for a few seconds so you can get an idea.
So Rachel, just so you know, we're not getting any audio
Oh,
from the video.
you're not? Oh,
No, no
sorry.
audio.
Oh, well, I'll let you click on that later, but it's just to get to know it's the Canjiao in the northeast of Brazil in the city of Salvador, and actually has a large social project uh, there that's run by a rather famous Brazilian musician, Carlinhos Brown, called Projeto Pracatum. And they have many social projects, including a school that they work with. And that's the children that we ended up working with. So to go back to the project, we worked on writing, feedback, and revising, and we used Storybird. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but it's an excellent site. It's free if you're an educator, and you can use pictures. They have pictures from all different artists, and they're very, vibrant and beautiful. Um, and students can create their own stories, so they can put in the text. They can also select pictures, deselect pictures, and they're very high quality, professional art. And they can actually print the books. Storybird has a printing service, so you could download them and print them for free, I believe. But you can also have them professionally printed and bound, and set up a fundraiser for your class. So that's actually what we did. Um, and just a little bit more, we also had individual progress reports. So my original idea for the project was that they would work in groups and vote on the best story or their favorite story, and we would work together on one or two stories. But the students ended up becoming very invested in what they were doing, and their stories became sort of like their babies. So I felt bad, um, or that it was a little unfair to take away people's stories. So since it was a small class and there were only 9 students, I decided to let them each work on their own stories, and that we would print copies um, of all their books individually. So instead of having group progress reports, we had individual progress reports where they talk about what their goals were for the week, um, if they attained those goals, what their next steps were, and also, you can't see it on this page, but any challenges or questions that they had. And just a few examples of pages from Storybird. So, as you can see, there's beautiful illustrations, and they include their own text. And I had one student, he was almost like a poet. He made this beautiful story, and it rhymed and everything. Um, so just so you can get an idea of what the books themselves look like. Then we got into the part of publishing and fundraising. So Storybird worked very well in a streamlined way that we could publish and print the books directly through them, and fundraise as well. So basically what we did was create a social media campaign and an email campaign, and there was a flyer that we made, and it basically asked our friends, family, whomever, to buy a book for children in Brazil, explain about our project, and we ended up selling enough books that covered the 24 students in the class that we were working with. So we were able to get them and have them bring them to Brazil. Another piece about Storybird, which I liked and I forgot to mention earlier, was that it allowed me to give the students feedback in a part called notes. So I ended up giving them a lot of language feedback and grammar feedback and vocabulary feedback through the notes section of Storybird, which was very helpful. It helped me give them notes and comments on their stories as they were working on them. And it's cloud-based, so they could, edit them, and their edits were saved and everything like that. And it worked well too in my class because I had a mix of heritage learners and non-heritage learners. So I was able to give a little more individualized feedback in terms of the language instead of just general, one size fits all feedback. So since I had varying levels of experience with Portuguese, I found it very useful to do it that way. And it's something to take into account maybe if you have a large amount of heritage learners. Another thing that I have to say about Storybird is they were extremely helpful. At the beginning of the project, they had like a 3 to 4 week turnaround time for publishing the books. But by the time we had reached the end of the project, um, I guess they had had a lot of projects going on, and the timeline had changed from 5 to 6 weeks. And we had, I think, about 4 weeks till my students were going to go to Brazil. So I said, I wrote an email to Storybird and I said, oh my gosh, I have these students and they're writing this project for these books for children in Brazil. Is there any way you can publish them faster? We have a deadline, and I didn't realize you had changed your publishing time frame. And actually, they were very responsive, responded right away, said, don't worry about it. We'll get them done as soon as we can. And I think within 4 or 5 days, I had the books printed out and ready to go. So Storybird, thank you very much. They were awesome to work with. We also created a video campaign, and this was to encourage the students in Brazil to read our books and sort of invite them to read and have them be excited that students from halfway around the world wrote these books for them. Part of it was because only really one of the students from the class was able to make the trip and go to Brazil and deliver the books. So the other students who couldn't go made these videos. And I will try to see if I unplug my headset, if maybe you can hear the video.
Alright. Oi, boa tarde. Eu sou Samuel, ou Samuelzinho, e eu gosto muito dos animais. E por isso eu quero que vocês leiam o meu livro, A Vida na Floresta. Tchau.
Sorry, I have to get my headset back in.
And yes, we were able to hear the video, and it sounded like the student was inviting the kids in Brazil to read his book. And
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So it's a way of using technology to connect the students and to make it a little bit more personal. And for those students who couldn't go personally to deliver the books, to sort of bring it to life and make them connect a little bit more with the students in Brazil. So these are some pictures of the students going to Brazil. That's Juan, and they are delivering the books to the Pracatum social project in the community, and Tyler, sorry. So they were able to go to Brazil and deliver the books in person. And here they are meeting the students, and these are the students from Centro Municipal de Educação Infantil Virgem de la Almudena. And there they are with Professora Kelly, the teacher we worked with, and meeting Juan and Tyler and getting the books. And that's just one of the students with cute picture. So I just wanted to kind of close with this quote, and this is from Patanjali. So in my free time when I'm not teaching language or doing other things, I like to practice yoga, and I really thought that this quote resonated with me. So when you're inspired by some great purpose or some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. So I think this really speaks to the power of projects and how it can empower not only our students, but it can even empower you as a teacher in seeing that your students are inspired, that they're using the language in a meaningful way, and that they're making connections with communities of the language. So for more information, if you can check out the Buck Institute of Education website, like I said, they have numerous publications and resources for implementing PBLL. Of course, the NFLRC, National Foreign Language Resource Center here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, they have a site called Pebble Site, which is a repository of project-based language projects, including my own, and many others. So you can, look through it for ideas and structure and thinking about your own projects. So just some final thoughts. Students are motivated to learn and enjoy doing something that's meaningful, impactful, and creative with the language. Project-based language learning is kind of the complete package. It has language, culture, and content, and applies learners' language skills to the real-world context. One thing you know if you've been through project-based learning, and if you haven't, you'll find out, is there will be road bumps and there will be challenges, but you will always find ways to get past them and work around them. Things might not flow totally smoothly, things may pan out in an unexpected way, but I think that's part of the learning process, and that's part of working in real life projects. In terms of gold standard project-based learning, the ideal is to have all those 8 components, but don't worry if your project doesn't hit everything, as long as you keep most of them in mind and try to, hit as many elements as you can still have a meaningful and effective project. And also, I really want to give a special thanks to the National Foreign Language Resource Center for all the support they've given, and the wonderful tools that they provide, the courses, the institutes, the symposiums. Again, if you're interested in project-based learning or project-based language learning, they really do have a tremendous amount of resources. I also wanted to thank the Associação Pracatum, Ação Social, the organization I worked with in Brazil. They were awesome and really welcoming of our project. And actually, the teacher who works with them, Kelly, was kind of inspired and is doing her own sort of video project with her students there who are learning English. Also, I wanted to thank ACBEL and especially Clara Ramos, which is a language school in Brazil, and she helped provide all the transportation and make arrangements for my students to visit the Pracatum Social Project. So I really want to thank Clara. Of course, I mentioned already, Storybird were awesome in terms of getting the books printed and getting them to us very quickly. And also, they even tweeted about us, which was nice. And last, of course, but not least, I want to thank the Buck Institute for Education for all the resources that they provide on project-based learning and for their support of project-based learning in general. And thanks, mahalo, obrigada. Oh, sorry. This is my contact info in case you have any questions. And actually, I will update. I realized I need to put the link in for this presentation, although it is on the first page. And references.
We will offer the presentation linked from our symposium page, as I mentioned.
Okay. So I guess questions if there's time.
We have so many questions. I don't think there's any way that we'll be able to get to them, but obviously your project has excited considerable interest. Before we get into the questions, I would like to say that the questions make me very happy, and even if we cannot address them all, rest assured that if you continue with this process that I will outline in the next session, there will be a lot of time for you to consider all these issues that you're raising. I'm going to start with the first question. I'm going to sort of pull rank. One thing that happens sometimes with projects is American students taking part in projects with, in an exchange with partners in a different country will be faced not only with cultural differences, but we often see these situations where there are considerable differences in empowerment or in material wealth or in cultural endowment, the level of culture that they have. And the result is sometimes that there is a kind of a missionary bent or, how we are going to help the other people kind of thing. And in this project, I'd like you to talk about what came from the other side, or what did your students get from the Brazilian side?
Right.
It wasn't a one-way thing, right?
Right. It's not a one-way street. And, I do realize, and I think it is something to be very aware of, is, of course, power and, uh, you know, cultural differences. And it's definitely something to keep in mind. And I don't want to say that we've cured the problem of illiteracy in Brazil, because far from it. But I think, students do, even if it does seem a little lopsided in terms of power relations, students do um, find working with communities in target language countries, or in the communities in the for the target language, very empowering. And I think, in Brazil, books are very expensive, prohibitively expensive for a lot of people, as is a lot of printed material. So I think being able to, even have a small impact in a small community, was something that was helpful for my students. And also, I think, just from communicating with the teacher there, Kelly, is that they are now working on a video project with their English students, the students that are learning English there. So I think, also the idea of sort of the contagiousness of working on projects is something that, you know, um, is
Yeah.
helpful. I'm not sure if that totally answered.
Well, I'd like to suggest something else, and that is, I wonder if your students had never considered the question of children's literature and the kinds of values and stereotypes and things that are perpetuated by a lot of children's literature that are unexamined. Most of us don't think about it.
Right, and I
As a
say,
result of your project, they did, because they saw that the interview with the professor.
yes, I think that is an important thing to think about, identity. And, not even only in Brazil. I can't remember, and this was something I did see on Facebook, so I can't state the reliability of it, but I did even see something about the number of characters of ethnic minorities within children's literature in the United States is also, sadly low and underrepresented. So, yeah, I think it is something to consider, even here.
Great. Would you consider stopping sharing screen and turning on your video?
Sure.
Great. All right. So while you're doing that, I'm going to send out another question. And
Okay.
that is, you had pretty good manageability in a small section of 9 students, and you had the wealth of having the combination of heritage and non-heritage students in the same section. How would this work if we had multiple sections of one course, larger population of students, and we wanted to do a project that stretched across multiple class sections?
Right. I think if I were working with larger classes or multiple sections, I would definitely do something more group-based, which my original idea was to do this project in groups. But like I said, the way it kind of panned out, it ended up being individual. But that really wouldn't have been manageable in a larger setting.
So what are some strategies that one might need to consider if one were doing a project that tried to join multiple sections?
Well, I think, thinking about sort of having, I guess, things well set up, and sort of like the group project progress reports and things like that, and how you would manage it. Also, if you're working with different instructors, I would think it would be important for them to be all on the same page in what you're doing. I don't know if you have other ideas, because my experience with this has been with a small class.
I guess my response to that would be that PBL and PBLL are both a kind of culture. And if the teachers don't all invest, if they're not all invested in the culture, it's definitely not going to work. So it's most important to have the educators come together and have a sort of team spirit before trying to deploy one project across multiple sections. Otherwise, it would be doomed.
Right. And I think also an important piece, not just the teachers buying into the project, but of course thinking about our students and having them buy into what they're doing too.
Okay, I'm going to move on to another question. Someone was wondering what would happen if your students wrote these stories and they were sort of at the wrong level? How were steps taken to ensure that the language that came out from your students was appropriate for low literacy situations?
Right. Well, I think that was an important part of looking at actual children's stories and having that experience of looking at what exists out there. So, you know, um, keeping it at the level of 5 or 6 year olds. So yeah, I think that was important to go through existing products and look what's out there, look at the language, look at the stories, and then, you know, kind of select appropriate themes and pictures and keep in mind the kind of language that they're using. And actually that worked well for my students because it was language they're a little bit more comfortable with.
Okay, here's another question.
Mm-hmm.
One teacher was wondering about the impact of the entry event. So she posited a situation where the teacher sort of excitedly launches an entry event that he or she thinks will grab the students and then finds out that it's not grabbing the students, or maybe that the project they have planned, or the idea that the teacher had rather, is unworkable or insufficient in some way. For example, in this project, what if you had discovered that the children were actually not low literacy, but no literacy, and you would have to make some kind of accommodation for their being unable to read the books straight off? Would the teacher sort of stick to their original plan, or would the teacher, make a radical change?
From my perspective, I would say, try to be flexible. I like to think be like water, so you will hit barriers, but you'll get around them. But yeah, I think if that were my case, I would probably try to make some kind of change into, either the level of the story or what you do with it. But also to keep in mind that literacy is not just being able to read text, but there's pieces of literacy is even knowing, to hold the book the right way, to flip the pages in a certain order. So those are all pieces of beginning literacy that I think sometimes we forget as teachers, which even having the physical books, I think can bring out for children.
Great. Another viewer posed a question about technology. What if you're thinking about doing a project and you want to connect with a community that is in a rural area that doesn't have high access to technology, both in terms of bandwidth and in terms of hardware? What are some ways that you can work around that kind of problem?
Yeah, that was one thing that we sort of encountered to a certain degree with our project. They didn't have, a lot of one-to-one technology available at the school, and also there's certain permissions that you have to have when working with children that, maybe doing video sessions and things like that wouldn't have worked with. So considerations like that. From my experience, I worked a lot with the teacher and was sort of like the intermediary between my students and the teacher. I did have a student who was able to go there and make the visit personally. But yeah, I think things like that. Another thing that we used was YouTube. So even though there wasn't great technological infrastructure in the school itself, YouTube is something that's, available anywhere. So we made those videos and we put them on YouTube so the students could watch them from a phone or from, the computer there at the school.
Okay, good. So it sounds like some strategies are making intermediaries that can carry messages between the students and your own group, not only for reasons of lack of technology, but also for reasons of, children needing special treatment.
Right.
Yeah, so that sounds...
Time difference too.
Yeah, the time difference.
Is something to consider.
Uh-huh. All right. Before we let you go, one person has asked about what were the students' impressions, ideas, and feelings during the process?
Overall, I think they had a really positive experience. I think it was very empowering for them to use the language in a meaningful way and to actually connect with the community and to connect with the children. However, there was only a tiny bit of negative feedback. The only negative feedback that they expressed to me was they would have liked to have more control over the images and the pictures. So Storyboard kind of has set images. Some of them had wanted to either make their own illustrations or, use their own pictures or something, or mix and match pictures in a way that Storyboard didn't allow. So some of them felt a little bit confined by the tool, but that was really the only negative feedback I got. Overall, they had a very positive experience with it.
I still want to give you more questions, and I'm not worried about the time. So I want.
Okay.
Yeah. When you gave feedback to your students in Storybird, it was in the notes area of the editing tool that they were using to create their stories.
Yes.
That feedback was visible to the student who was working on the story. Of course, that's good because they're the one who obviously needs it. But did you focus on that feedback for the group? Did you pull examples of feedback that you gave to individual students and show it to all the students because other people might have benefited from it?
I did not. That would be an idea. But yeah, I didn't end up doing that. There was, my students did have sort of a little story triangle day where they showed each other in small groups their stories and gave feedback to each other, but that was more sort of content and, kind of supportive type of feedback. I don't think they were overly critical with each other, but it would be an idea to take out examples and highlight them. But like I said, I was working with a mixed group. I think I had about 3 heritage learners with a relatively high proficiency and then some mixed levels there. So it did end up being more individualized, and we didn't do it so much as a group, although we had done a few sort of related exercises together. One thing we were looking at originally was the past tense, but it ended up not appearing so much in the stories they wrote, so I kind of scrapped that idea.
Sounds like you had to be flexible.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're a little bit past time, and so I'm going to say goodbye. And for everyone whose question didn't get answered, please hold on to it and join us for our online institute, and you will get a chance to get some knowledge about those things during the institute, I am sure. So thank you very, very much, Rachel.
Well, I want to thank all of you, you, Stephen, and Julio, and Charisse, and everyone else, and all of you who are here and taking your time out to participate in this symposium.
Everybody, please do give your evaluation of this presentation. There'll be a link posted in just a second in the chat. Please follow the link. And today, the permissions should be fixed so that you can go ahead and fill out that little survey.
Also, please feel free to, keep the conversation going with me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, email, whatever you want to do.